So it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Tom Ashmore. He is the president of the West Texas Archeological Society, and he will give a presentation of their 3-year archaeological project at Camp Meyers Spring, located 100 miles northwest of Fort Clark. Throughout its occupation, the sub-post of Fort Clark was home at different times to an infantry company, multiple cavalry companies, and the Black Seminole Indian Scouts detachment. The archaeological fieldwork has covered an incredible 200 acres, breaking down the camps in detail and revealing daily life in this harsh environment. And Tom, I just want to say thank you again for agreeing to do this presentation.
Yeah, we love talking about this work.
Yes, your work is incredible. So, I just, every opportunity that we have, for you to share it, I think is amazing. Everybody who's heard your work and has been able to be a part of your presentations always comes away amazed at just your passion and dedication to this. So thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah.
Everybody here gets to experience it now.
Okay, we'll go ahead and share the screen.
Let me make you a host.
I'm waiting for you, I guess.
Yeah. All right, there you go.
Okay, sure. Okay, can everybody see the screen? Yeah, you're good? Mm-hmm. Okay. So we'll get started then. Let's see if I can. All right, that's full screen, I guess. Is that good? Everybody sees that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So as she said, this has been going on we're in our 3rd year now. And in fact, we just got back last weekend for our most recent trip. The landowner asked us to come up 2 years ago because there had been multiple archaeological projects up there. And although they knew it was a military camp, they couldn't figure out the layout of the camp. And that is one of the things that my work has pretty much focused on, is understanding satellite imagery and drone imagery and combining that with archaeology to figure out things that are on the ground that you can't really see on the ground. You can only see it from above. So we went up there and we did some studies for about 3 months before going up. And I was able to see things that were not natural in the ground there. And we were able to determine the outlay of the camp. It started off with about 5 acres, looking at 5 acres there. And it quickly exploded on us because it was much bigger than we ever imagined. It is now a 90-page report. And I have just started the 2026 update, so it will be bigger than 90 pages by the end of this year, too. We've worked with the Fort Clark Historical Society, Russell, and he has provided us with post returns and Lieutenant French's diary and the museum there, of course, which has been really helpful, especially the diary. The diary was able to give us firsthand accounts of somebody that lived there. And then we could verify those things along with all of the other archaeological tools we were using. We use metal detection as our primary tool on the ground because we're dealing with essentially trash that was been left behind. And we're looking for metal and looking for patterns of the metal that we can find in the ground. There's a lot of trash up there, but finding it in the ground, we know that it came from the place that we're standing on instead of getting blown by the wind, for example. And our discoveries there, you can see we found 2 Black Seminole Indian Scout camps. We found 2 Tonkawa Scout camps, 1 infantry construction camp, which was the original unit that was sent up there to officially make it a camp, 4 cavalry camps, 1 main camp, and then there's 3 more, depending on if they had more than 1 company up there. 2 outlying cavalry water collection camps because they ended up needing more water than they anticipated. And then while they were there, the Pecos Land and Cattle Company came in, and this land was owned by Lieutenant Bullis. He purchased the land from the railroad, and he leased it to the Pecos Land and Cattle Company while the military was there. So then we had another layer of stuff that we had to decipher out about the cattle company that was there at the same time. You can see here, this is a kind of a little mini museum that's in the owner's. He's got a large barn that kind of is a dual barn, tool shed, dining room, just about everything. And in the corner there, we've got a lot of the stuff that we found for people to look at. He brings in tour groups for the rock art, which is down at the spring. It's a famous rock art panel, 100 feet long, of historic Indian rock art pictographs. And they bring in tours, and they can bring in the groups and have a lunch in there, and they can look at this. And so they come in and do the pictographs in the morning, and then they'll go out and see the military camp in the afternoon. You can see the panel there on the bottom left with one of the tour groups there that was this last fall tour group. And in that particular one, if the guy in the middle here is Apache Indian, that is Eli, who is Richard and Anita's son from Brackettville there. And he's showing them some of the things that we've determined to be Apache on the wall there. We had a tour group up in there in 2023. You can see there. We are happy to bring people from your ancestors and show them the land that most people didn't even know about, that the Seminole Indian Scouts were up there. From this period, they didn't even know, and we didn't know when we first started, but we found out fairly quickly. And on the bottom right there, you can see that that's actually in the camp that they had created for themselves. Then we had another tour group up in 2024, and this is them on the left. Here is the remnants of the building that was built by the Pecos Land and Cattle Company, that was essentially right in the middle of the military camp. So we enjoy having everybody up there and walking them around and showing them the ground that everybody was camping and living on. So going to the beginning here, it was used by Lieutenant Bullis, and the Scouts must have taken him up there the first time that he took over the Scouts at Brackettville in as early as 75. And it was apparent, obviously, that it's such a good water place and a good camp that they made it their base of operations while they were out on patrol. And he ended up purchasing the land himself from the railroad. Before that, it was called Paint Rock Spring. And you can see from an old map here from 1876 that we found recently, it's actually got Paint Rock Springs on the map here. And you've got Colonel Shafter's route here when he was doing some of the early exploration, and Lieutenant Geddes, who was 8th Cavalry also. So they knew about it as far back as 76 and probably a little bit earlier than that. On the left here, you can see it's 126 miles per the route that they used, and in this one they don't have the name of it, but you can see it's called Painted Rock Creek below it, and that's actually Lozier Canyon today, going down. It's a very deep canyon, and they just called it Paint Rock Creek. Our theory on the name, because nobody really knew where the name came from, is we think, after a lot of research, that it actually came from the scouts themselves, and it's Spanish, which is mayor, meaning biggest or main. And when Bullis went to make the camp official, they would have asked him, "Okay, what are you going to name it?" And I think the scouts that's what they were calling it. So he called it, "Oh, mayor," and that they transliterated it into English. And their first name on all of the military records was Meyers Spring, not Meyers Spring. And then later on, somehow the A got changed to an E to Meyers Spring. So anyway, that's our theory, because we can't find anything else, any other person's name that matches with anything. So I think it was the scouts that did name it. Starting back at the earliest time that we've been able to find archaeologically is 1873. We were this one we found later on from when we were just kind of scouting through the canyon area, and what we came across on the if you can see the far right, I'm not sure if it's blocked out for you or not, but that there's a pile of rocks that is set in a kind of a horseshoe shape, and that's called a redoubt. And the military used these things for guard posts, essentially. And this particular one is in a place where it actually shouldn't be, because it isn't guarding anything. But what it is doing is it's looking down from above on a ledge here, down to the main spring area where the pictographs and the spring would flow to. And it's a perfect overwatch site. So what we think was going on here is that they were watching from up above secretly, like a reconnaissance patrol, to see if the Indians were coming in to do any watering, and as they passed through the area. And we found a lot of Sharps 50-45 cartridges and 50-55, which is commonly called 50-70, in this area, where they were just kind of goofing off, I think, shooting off target practice and stuff while they were bored. And we found also in there a Spencer 5650 that had been dropped. So these particular ones are in a certain period of time, a short window of time before they switched over to other weapons. And it's that 1873 time is a perfect time. Here's the weapons. And the scouts were using the Spencers at the time. That's what their original issuing rifle was. And the soldiers were using the Sharps. So we think that the Spencer probably came from one of the scouts dropping as they walked down the hill or something, accidentally came out of his belt there. And it looks like the soldiers were just kind of target practicing. The Sharps 45 is the shorter, because the carbine the 50-70 full cartridge was too powerful for the carbine. So there was a lot of complaints, and they made the shorter one for the Sharps there. But these longer ones were called 50-55s because they had less powder than the rifle ones. So we had to do a whole research thing on guns and rifles and ammunition to figure all this stuff out. Across the way here, we found two 44 lead balls, which at first we couldn't figure out, but later on we did. They were also an issuing gun for the cavalry at that time. And this is a example of one of the cap and ball revolvers that were issued. Going around and walking around the bottom of the base here, we found this button in just about perfect condition. And by looking on the back, you can tell that it has 2 stars. And that means that it was a Civil War era button. And the Civil War era buttons were used as surplus into the early 70s. And a little bit later too, but especially during the early 70s, it was Civil War surplus. So that kind of helps you tie the time frame down again. And then continuing on around, we found 4 44 Smith & Wesson cartridges over here in this area here. And we think that this area here was probably where the horses were being kept. It was a pretty good grazing area, had a little bit of a creek running through the middle of it, and it would have had a lot more grass than any other location. After looking at the armament post returns, we found 1 unit in the 4th Cavalry during the 1873 period that matched up with every single one of these weapons, right, as an issuing weapon for that unit. That was an unusual time because they were testing out all sorts of different things. So they didn't have one particular weapon. They were trying out different ones. So that's why they had a variety of different weapons here, especially in the revolver kind. So that's the earliest time that we think the military was up there. We weren't sure where they were camping. And then on a later trip, we went on around and we're looking in this area here, and then we found more of the 50-45s in that area, which ties this back to the first area over here where I was talking about earlier. And then we found this picket stake, and they would stake those picket lines up for the horses, and that's an example of one here in the bottom. So that would have been their camping spot. So they camped way over here and all the way around this mesa to where they were doing their surveillance of the spring area, which makes a lot of sense because if you kept the horses over here or even over here grazing, if horses came in to the spring area, they wouldn't sense each other, because horses will sense each other and they'll talk to each other and give away your position. So they kept them pretty far away. So it all makes sense when you put it together. The next thing we found, one of the later times, not the earlier times that we were there, we found the early Bullis camp itself, which was the first camp that he was camping with the Seminole Scouts before it became an official camp. And so this was in the 1875 to 1880 period. This was the area of the tents. Over here in this hill was their picket and grazing area. We found a line of horseshoes, 150 feet long line, which shows that that's a picket line, and they were changing their horseshoes while they were picketed up. And we also found some cartridges and a 45-55 blank, and some cartridges that indicated some testing was being done of the 44 Schofield revolver. And if you look down here, you see that the camp is set up in a semicircle, which in the military is not something that they would do normally. In fact, they wouldn't do it at all. This is very, very obviously an Indian style setup, design of a camp. And this is the way that the scouts had convinced Bullis that this is the way that they wanted to make their camp, similar to the way that they were taught by the Seminole Indians. I spoke with somebody that came from Florida in your Seminole days a couple years back, and they told me that in fact was the way that the Seminole Indians taught them. So that was really good verification for us for the way that they set up their camp. It's a semicircle. There were 20 tents. It would be 2 men per tent. Covers about 5 acres. Over here, we found a blacksmith dump. We'll go into that a little bit more here. So here's the two camps side by side. This is the Bullis camp on the left, and the official scout camp later on the right. And you can see they're both set up the same way, essentially the same way. The chief, or in this case, the lieutenant, was set up in the middle, and then concentric circles going out by rank after that. So the inner area was the sergeants, and then going out by rank. All the other ones would have been privates, but by time probably is what they were using. And then the ones that were in the far outer circle would be the ones that had the least amount of time in service, probably. One interesting thing here is if you look at the north-south, all the tents, the openings of the tents are facing east. So again, they're following the Indian way. And this is a picture of me standing in the middle here of the main tent that would have been Bullis's tent. So going back to the Bullis camp, we found 3 44 Colt bullets that had been shot straight into the ground. For one thing, that showed us that these were probably Seminoles, because the Seminoles would have been issued the older weapons, whereas very quickly the rest of the cavalry had moved on to the 45 caliber weapons, revolvers. And these were well known for accidental firing. You can see that the firing pin is just like a pin. That's why they call it a pin, but in this case, it really is a sharp pin. And hardly any kind of pressure would fire the bullet. So in most cases, they were told to keep their chamber empty for the sixth bullet. And if you didn't, and you did anything wrong, then you might have an accidental discharge. And it looks like there was 3 accidental discharges in this camp, which helped us quite a bit because it told us that there were 44 revolvers, which helped a lot. We found this fire striker here that's kind of a handmade forged fire striker and next to one of the tent sites. We found this whiteware. We call it whiteware, but it's basically a dishware over here. And I'll talk about that more in the next slide here. And then we found this blacksmith dump. It basically took all the blacksmithing items and walked it over there with a bucket, and just dumped it over there. This is all the stuff that we found. These are horseshoe ends. So when they're measuring out, getting the shoes too long, they have to cut the end off. That's that. This is broken horseshoes here, wagon parts. And then the big one is we found this slag from a forge within this pile. So that means that they had a mobile forge with them. And that tells you that this is a base camp. This is not just a patrol camp. This is a base of operations type of camp that they would come to. Zooming in a little bit, you can see, this is satellite imagery. You can see a line right here. That is the wagon road coming up, and it stops right at this point where I'm marking here. So that's where they were unloading their supplies. And this lighter area in a kind of a rectangular shape is a shape of a dining area, the dining tents, dining flies that they would have. And this right here is where the whiteware was found, right in the area that would have been the dining area. So somebody dropped a pretty expensive dish. That was a stoneware dish from England. And we'll look at that next here. This is one that I found on eBay for being sold at auction. and it matches exactly the maker's mark, and it's stamped 1868. So this is a from J&G Meakin, Hanley, England ironstone dish. Well, who would have an ironstone dish from England up there? Well, that would be Bullis, because Bullis came from a wealthy family. He married into a wealthy family. So many of the men of wealth that went out on the cavalry range and stuff like that, they would bring their own. They didn't want to eat off of the metal plates and stuff. They would bring their own dishware. And it looks like this is what he did, and somebody accidentally dropped it there. So that was a big find for us. Probably a real bad thing for whoever dropped it at the time, though. So we had to go back and look at all of the reports and figure out who is where and what. So we had to lay that all out, and it actually helped quite a bit to understand what was going on. So the earliest time that we had a large force up there was 1877. We just came across this information recently. Lieutenant Bullis and the scouts followed an Apache raiding party into Mexico, and they got themselves into an ambush in a canyon. And they barely were able to extract themselves out and get back. And he called for reinforcements down to Fort Clark, and they sent him 3 cavalry companies and 2 infantry detachments. One large one, which was going to be mounted infantry, and one wagon infantry detachment. And they all went up there and stayed at Meyers Spring there in preparations for a return into Mexico to go after these Indians again. So at this one time, they had three cavalry companies, an infantry mounted company, and another wagoned infantry regiment detachment up there all at the same time, which is about 265 men, all in that one location. So that was a big deal because it showed us some of the things that we were seeing were larger than we thought should be up there, but this tells us why. They used it off and on through 80 and into 81. And then he convinced the military to make it into an official camp. And they sent Company A of the 1st Infantry Regiment, who had just come down from South Dakota, over there to break or cut a road through the canyon down to the spring so that they could get wagons down that canyon. They were there for like 8 months. They didn't have a lot of men, but it was hard work to build a road through a canyon that wasn't designed for a road. They had a lot of rock cutting. So that was the first thing. And then when they finished up, the cavalry started coming in and getting oriented to the camp. So they started rotating all the different companies through this camp. Each one of them had to come up and get oriented to the camp. And at one time down here, they had 2 companies up here at one time, plus the scouts were there at the same time. Once they got that all done, the cavalry finished up what they were doing, and then it was turned over to the scouts to find a new camp. And it looks like Lieutenant Jones brought up 8 of his scouts just for about 6 days to figure out where they wanted their camp in relation to where the cavalry had already set up their camps. And here it continues on. So they came back up with the 22nd Infantry Detachment, which was a engineering crew, and they engineered their scout camp during this period of time. Also during that period of time, they brought out Tonkawa scouts, and it looks like this was the time where the Seminole scouts were training or giving their skills, tricks of the trade over to the Tonkawa. because the Tonka were originally from Fort Griffin up in the plains, and they weren't used to this kind of terrain for learning how to track. Finished that up, and then the cavalry came back, and you can see here that then they started going cavalry only, then Seminole Scouts only, and then back and forth, back and forth. Um, so this tells you that the Scouts were set up as their own cavalry unit, essentially. The only time that they were actually scouting out in front of a cavalry unit was when they had a large force formation, like a full regiment under Mackenzie or something like that. But the other times they were there up there by themselves. And they went back and forth until 84 when it was determined that they could decommission the camp. So this is what the entire camp area looks like from above. And you've got the early scout camp that I just went over, and you've got the later scout camp. This is where they chose the second location. This area here is the infantry area until they left. And then you've got 4 cavalry areas, with number 1 being the main area. And there's a lot of guard posts out there that were set up by the infantry that we found. And a cavalry corral there too. So I thought I'd show you a little bit about how we started to figure all this stuff out. So if you look at this as this one particular year in satellite imagery, it shows up real clearly that there's these unusual splotchings and lines that are not natural to this area when you look at it. Especially these 2 lines here. It's one thing to see deer trails, but these 2 lines are exactly parallel to each other, which tells you that this is man-made. And the splotching here is not natural at all. So this is what keyed us in and started us to look at what was going on. And from here, I could see wagon tracks coming out of these areas and going to the guard posts, for example. And we started following the wagon trails to find all the other different areas. This is what it turned out to be. Here's the lines, and what they did was they surveyed out the lines for the camp for the privates in the infantry company, and they built themselves a corral here. And then these splotches are the entrance areas to the tents. That's why it's all splotchy there, because it gets all kicked up and the vegetation never grew back properly because it's so dry there. And I was able to determine how the entire camp was laid out. It's laid out in a typical military fashion where the command compound is separated from the rest of the military here. The younger privates over here, they've got a main mess tent. They have a command mess tent because the officers did not eat with the enlisted, of course, and they would put a kitchen in between. They always had a hospital tent with a doctor, and they always had a captain, 2 lieutenants, and a first sergeant in the command compound area. So this is how this laid out. After the infantry left, the Seminole Scouts took over this corral for themselves. And that's probably why they chose this area adjacent to here for their camp. This shows you how much territory it actually covers. If you look at Fort Clark, the main area there, and you look at this, that's 25 acres each. So it's a large area to cover. This is the information over here on the right, is that winter campaign I mentioned in 1877, and it breakdowns all the different companies and detachments that were there. It was 162 personnel, not 200. So that's quite a bit. And if we look at the cavalry camps, this is what it looks like from the imagery on the left. And this is the way it is where I've actually placed the tents into the locations where the splotching, again, is the entrance areas to each one of the tents. And in this case, they had individual tents. So this is a full company here. And there was a wagon road on this is the one that goes to Langtree, actually. So this is the one they would come in on. They made that their border, the back end of their, and they set it up in columns the way that they ride when they're moving in an open space. They always ride 4 columns abreast, and they actually camp the same way that they ride. So that was an interesting thing to find too. You can see it's 230 yards. And up on the top here, you can see that they decided to make themselves a corral. So I told you that the scouts took over the infantry corral after the infantry left. The cavalry will never allow their horses to be mixed with anybody else, whether it be the Seminole Scouts, civilian horses, or anything of that nature. They were very, very particular about their horses, and so they built themselves their own corral. So there was actually 2 corrals up there. And this is a drone image looking directly down on where their corral was. So if you can kind of gaze at this for a second and see if you can see the oval shape of the corral in the vegetation. Can you see that, you think? So I'm going to show you. It's obviously the area that's the gray area in the middle, right? But this is the corral like that. That's the corral. So we went in there and we did metal detecting, and on both sides of this corral, we found the pulled nails that when they had taken the corral apart, and probably after the military left, it was a lot of the corral fencing and stuff was reused down by the spring for other purposes. So what they did was they pulled all the nails and moved the wood. And we found the line of nails that ran the long ways of the corral there. We found the wagon trails, which I've marked here. There was 2 of them going into the corral. And what they did was they set up internally, they set up a separation area. So this would be the area that the farrier would work on the horses, on shoeing, or if they needed to separate their horses out and for saddling or unsaddling, whatever, so they could keep the horses separate from the rest of the remuda. And we also found a separate support camp. So these guys would have been, their whole duty would be to take care of the horses, take care of the wagons, all of the other kind of support duties that goes along with having to be there 24 hours a day to take care of that area right there. So looks like they had 5 guys doing that. We found 2 of these wire bands, and we found out that those bands fit to nail keg barrels. So there you got for all the nails for the fencing. And right here in the middle, where the wagons came in, we found this can, and a wagon had run right over the can, and this is the indentation from the wagon wheel. So that helped to verify these wagon roads. So trying to show you how we kind of figure all this stuff out piece by piece. I mentioned the wagon roads, and you can see here, and this is satellite imagery, right? You can see that line there. You can actually see both of the wheel rutting in a line going down there. And this would have been the cavalry supply wagon that would go to the guard posts. So it would come down this road here, and this was one of the guard posts here, and then it would go down, turn around, come back, and this was the return trip. And it would go down this way. It would come around the camp, and then it would go all the way to the other side and do the same thing on the other side. There was two guard posts on each side of the camp for the cavalry. We were even the first day we were there, we were walking down here to look at an area right here that they had fixed up a water diversion area for the wagon trail. And we were walking back. We didn't even realize this. And my partner told us to stop and turn around. And he took this picture. And you can see the wagon road is still visible in the bushes behind us. So this wagon road here is actually this right here where we're standing. So another significant validation of the imagery on the ground. And on the right-hand side is the guard post from over here. And you can see the rocks. The rocks had kind of fallen down, but the trash and all this stuff, there's a lot of supply cans and all that other stuff that would be there because they would have to eat while they're at the guard posts. And they would bring the supply boxes were the cans and boxes. So they were very heavy. They had to bring them in with wagons. And so that's what a guard post looks like. We've since built it back up to the way it was, piled the rocks back up as they were properly for tour groups to see. So getting back into the Seminoles camp, as I said, the first official documentation was called, let's see, I'm supposed, two people entered the room waiting. You. Oh man. Invite, I guess. Admit. I don't know. I told,
Yeah, you can admit everybody.
yeah. I told Wendy that when I get going, I don't even look at anything else. And that's what happened. So sorry about that. Okay, I think I've got that done. I'm gonna invite them all. I don't know. I'm just pushing buttons at this point.
Yeah, you can just admit everybody.
Okay, I think I got it.
Okay.
All right. So the first official time was 1881 that they came in. Camp was 4 years. There was a rotating detachment of commanders for the scouts, and these are the second lieutenants in order that they came in. And Lieutenant French, one of those lieutenants, he kept that daily diary. And that was a big help in figuring out a lot of this stuff. Average number is 38 to 40. Sometimes it's down to 36 or so, depending on if somebody got sick or had to go back to Clark or whatever. They had their own kitchen, their own mess tent, their own blacksmith. During this period of time, they didn't have as many problems as they had during the Bullis time. So they would go out on patrol, but very rarely during that 81 to 84 period did they ever come across any indication that the Indians were still coming up from Mexico to try to do any raids. After Bullis and the scouts went down there, and Mackenzie went down there with his raids and all of the things that everybody knows about, that pretty much stopped the Indians from coming up. I've got another admit. So what they were doing during that time, one of their main duties was courier duty back to Fort Clark, taking care of the horses, collecting water, and hunting. They were very good at their hunting, whereas the regular cavalry and infantry were not. But they were very good, and I've got a good example here of it. The military supplies were still brought up from Fort Clark on a regular basis. They contracted for additional forage for the horses because there wasn't really enough up there to take care of them. So they were bringing in hay wagons. At one point, French wrote that they had 50 tons of hay on hand. And his job was just to make sure it didn't all get ruined and molded out and stuff. To make sure it all got out there and spread out and dried out if it got wet or anything like that. It was brought up from Langtree, from the Torres Brothers farm. They also got vegetables and poultry from the Torres Brothers, and later on from Sanderson when the railroad came in. Some of the interesting things that we found was we found two wagon hooks. This is one of them here, another one up in the corner here. I don't know if you can see it. But what that tells us is that they were bringing in double wagons, as in the picture below here. And that puts a lot of weight on these hooks and stuff. So looks like they broke off at least 2 times hooks for these double wagons. So this is some of the stuff that they were using for bringing in some of the supplies from the probably from the Torres brothers when they were bringing in stuff for them. As I said, their hunting skills were very good. And from what we can tell, from what I could tell, French couldn't hit anything. And I doubt if many of the military regulars were very good at hunting either. But the scouts were great. This is just from his diary. And you can see how many times they brought in animals to add to their diet. That was just the canned goods coming out of military supply stuff. In one of the cases they caught, this one here, one of the men came in and he had killed 5 deer himself. And they had to send a whole bunch of guys back out to bring all the deer in. So that's pretty astonishing even today to kill 5 deer out in the wild like that for one person. Here you've got some of the names: Kibitz, Daniels, wild pigs. They were catching fish, turkey, everything. So the guys that were in charge of the scouts actually were doing really good as far as the food was concerned, compared to the guys that were coming up in the regular cavalry who were eating out of cans all the time, you know. So we thought that was really interesting and good for them. We found teepee rings up there, and they were actually found before us, and nobody was sure what the heck was going on. Teepee rings should not be in this area at all. Teepees were for the Plains Indians. And if you found anything up there, it would have been a wickiup ring, which is what the Apaches would use. And there's a difference. In fact, we found a wickiup ring just this last weekend that is different from these. And it was about 4,000 years old. So these would hold down the poles for in the wind, and they were 15 feet across. There was 3 of them, and we also found a smaller one right here, which would have been a day shade type of teepee, kind of a half teepee. So the question is, why are you seeing teepees in the lower Pecos region when they're not supposed to be there? When the Indians were coming through, the Comanche or the Apache, they were on the move all the time. They weren't dragging teepee with them. When you're pulling teepees with you, if you're talking about a pretty heavy load of poles that have to go with you, because they're hard to find heavy poles like that, and you keep them and you drag them. And when they were up in the plains, that's how you were able to find their movements of camp to camp, because it just makes a huge gash in the ground. Well, turns out these were Tonkawa scouts. And the Tonkawa came from Fort Griffin, and they were transferred to Clark. 6 Indians I showed you deployed in April of '82, probably getting skill training from the scouts on how to track through this kind of mountainous, rocky area. And they were known to always stick to their culture. And this picture here on the bottom is them at Fort Griffin as scouts. So this shows you that even as scouts, they never gave up their cultural heritage of living in teepees. So what they did was they brought their teepees along with them for this trip too. And we also found whiteware there, mule shoe nail, boot heel nail, 45 Colt cartridge, things that were normally found with the military were found around these teepee rings. So now we have that puzzle was solved. Later on another trip, we found more teepee rings and we said, well, wait a minute, that doesn't match because the first trip they had 6 Indians and it was 2 per teepee. So why did we have 2 more teepee rings up here? And we went back and looked at the records, and you'll see that in May and June, 2 of the cavalry companies, or one cavalry company came and stayed at Meyers Spring, and they brought 3 Tonkawa scouts with them during that time, and one more later in the next month. So that accounts that they decided that they wanted this area here instead of the original area, and the reason being there's a spring source here off to the left. And this spring source is probably better water than the original camp, or maybe the water had changed at that time. This one spring might have dried up, the other spring might have started up or whatever. So this spring here was coming down pretty good at this time, and they decided to set up their teepee rings down here. So now that gave us the puzzle piece for that second group of teepee rings. And then in July, this is June here at the bottom, July, all the Tonkawa were discharged from service at Fort Clark. So maybe they didn't do as well as the scouts and were released, because that's tough territory to be a scout in. And if you didn't really know what you're doing, you might not be able to track as well as you could up in the plains, is my guess. So going back to the Seminole camp, this is the second camp, and I said that the engineering company came up with them, and this is a drone picture. And if you look real closely at this one, you'll see there are lines going through from the middle here. And if you keep looking, you'll see there's multiple lines in the vegetation. And here is the way they did it. So they actually surveyed this out. And this means that the military actually officially approved of the scouts getting to have a circular camp the way that they wanted it. So that's a pretty good thing. I think Bullis had a lot to do with that, with convincing them to, for morale purposes especially. They went through a lot of things that most would not go through. And this is one thing that Bullis told the military probably, that this was important to them and you need to do it. And they did. So, and then when we laid on top of that, where the each one of those camp tent areas are, you end up with this. So it actually matches up properly too, with the splotching that I mentioned earlier from the tents and everything. So it all matches up properly. You'll see here there's an open area. This is the area that they used for assembly in the mornings to have assembly. So that was an open area left open. Here's the assembly area in the bottom. And there was a large stone that they placed so that the commander could stand on the stone while he's addressing the troops in the morning. We called that the podium stone so that he could stand up and see everybody in formation. And these are some of the things that we found. These are a couple of interesting things. This one is just a can that was hammered to this rock to give it a hard base to make it a candle holder for inside one of the tents. This is a full baking powder can that we found that was about 6 inches down in this outer ring, one of these tent sites here. And it was never opened, and we think that somebody probably five-fingered it out of the kitchen and hid it to take it home and forgot when it came time to leave and left it there because it was 6 inches down. That's deeper than anything else we ever found there. So they dug it and buried it on purpose. Some of the, we didn't expect to see a blacksmith tent there, but we did. And you can see some of the items from the blacksmith tent. The horseshoe pieces, wagon pieces, horseshoe nails, etc. So that validated that this is where the blacksmith was working. Let's see, I already went through that teepee ring thing. I don't know why that. Okay, so now we get to the Pecos Land and Cattle Company. This was a problem because many people, even on the internet now, were saying that the stone buildings were military buildings there. And we had to figure out, were they or were they not military? Well, the diary that Lieutenant French put out was made pretty obvious that it was not military. He talked about it. They brought this in as a consortium. They came in and bought a whole bunch of land, but they started off by leasing this land from Bullis to start the cattle operation. They needed that water. They brought in an operations manager. They purchased 106 sections. You can see here they bought some of the cattle companies or ranches that were already there. And they started their construction right there in the middle of the camp. And they did show a profit for a while, but they spent too much money, and the income and the outcome and the income just didn't match up, and later on they actually dissolved. But how we figured out that this building was not military helped us was for the diary, and I'm going to give you a narration here that I've put in from his diary.
Thursday, November 29th. Mr. Luche ate over at Thurston. They brought over their carpenter, engineer, and more workmen who came up this morning. Saturday, December 1st. They commenced to build a small house on the corner of their land nearest camp and got it partially completed by night. Sunday, December 2nd. The men worked a little on the new house today, and it was necessary too for their comfort to get into as soon as possible. Wednesday, December 19th. After dinner, went over to the house to see how the chimney was progressing. Monday, December 31st. Stopped to go over to meet Mrs. Luche, who came with her husband and maid. Found her a real pleasant lady. Their house being unfinished, the doctor put his tent at her disposal and has moved in with me.
So you can see that that's pretty obvious that house was built for the cattle company CEO. That means that the other stone buildings that were in the area were also for the cattle company. And one of the key things of this was these two other buildings out by where the corral was. And what we were able to figure out was that the gate for the corral was here. There was a tent the infantry put a tent and one guy in there to take care of the animals. And by using that gate, we know where the fence line is. And the fence line goes through both of these stone buildings, which means that those stone buildings couldn't have been there when the fence was there for the corral. The stones from this building were brought from a animal watering area that the military built in a circular stone wall here to keep the animals out until they would allow them in for watering. And they also had a stone wall around this area here where the gate is and the tent was. So a lot of the rocks were brought over for this one.
Oh, you want to golf?
So
Okay, I'm heading to the grocery store.
somebody's not muted. The next thing we were looking at was the cattle company wanted to build a tank at the bottom of the spring here, and for the water to conserve the water. This is a later tank that was built by Bullis in 1902, but the tank on the bottom here is the pictures where you can see the stone blocks that were quarried out for this original tank. And why this is important is that they hired the Seminole Scouts to help them and paid them for it separately from their military pay. And so we have information from the French diary, and I have another narration on his comments.
The doctor and I walked out to the house and onto a water hole which all hands were engaged in cleaning out. It is their intention to scrape off all the dirt down to the solid rock, build a stout dam across the bottom, cement all, put a layer of earth on the bottom to retain the moisture, and put in solid banks. Then, when the rains have filled the hole, they hope to be able to hold the water some time. Saw them make one blast and then strolled about a mile farther from camp.
So what they were doing was they were hiring them to help them from the quarry site, and they used the wagon along with the wagon from the cattle company, to move the stones that were being quarried out of this site here. That's about 150 yards away, down to where the tank was being created. And then there's another narration here.
Went out to see the tank and found some of the Seminoles at work, which I had permitted them to do, Lou J hiring them. But they had 4 mules in the wagon and were working the mules without saying anything to me. Told Lou J the mules could not work anymore.
So what they did was, if they would have harmed any of those mules by accident, Lieutenant French would have been in big trouble by allowing them to be used by a civilian CEO, cattle company. So that's why he wouldn't let the mules be worked. But he did allow the men to continue working with them to get the pay. We were able to here's the quarry company, or quarry area here. There's a second quarry area here. And they would move it down to this location. They also had to make lime for the mortar. And we found where they were doing that. This is the area, and what they did was they used lime ricks. And we had to do a lot of research to figure this out. They had two tents, probably 4 men at least, not Seminole. They were the cattle company hirees contracted to work the lime rick burns to develop the lime for the mortar. They would have to. We found a cross through where the wagon came through and came up to get to one of the quarry areas here. And this is where we found one of the buttons from the scouts that were on the wagon. And it actually rolled over the wagon. And that particular button is one that we have given now to the museum, because we know for a fact that the scouts were helping out in this area here, but nobody else was ever in that area, in the military at least. And this is what down here on the left side, we got one of the tours where they're looking down that road right here. And this is the what we gave to the museum, the 5650 drop and the button. And we did that in the last Seminole days. So the lime ricks are burned piles that you can see on the bottom here. They use layers of limestone and then layers of wood, back and forth, and they put a wick down the middle of it and light the whole thing. It takes 2 days to burn. It's very toxic. And you can see where they put their tents here, made sure that they got it away from the wind, downwind or upwind, either one. They had to break up the limestone into small pieces, then they had to burn it, then they had to pull it out, then they had to crush it into, hammer it into like a powder granule type of thing. Here's an example that was done from the George Washington Ferry Farm with oyster shells using the same technique. Here's what it looked like coming in the wagon. They dumped the rocks from the quarry that were not being used. Those would break those rocks up into smaller rocks, and then they would put them into the burn pile or the burn rick, burn the thing. Then they would move them over to a crushing and sorting area, and we validated that area. This is some of the stuff that came out of the area where it's already burned. And this is an example of the untouched limestone, what it would look like if it was not burned. They would then gather that crushed limestone, burned limestone up, take it down, and then all you have to do is put it into water, and it just bubbles up into a paste, and put the sand in with it, and you got your mortar. So, a wrap up. This is the entire camp, looking at it from a drone perspective. The scout camp here is the first original infantry camp, the 4 cavalry camps, the home, the corral here for the cavalry, and the original Bullis camp and the original Bullis picket grazing area here, as you look at that. And here is, if you do look at the entire area, we have now covered 200 acres. And these are all the pins of the different areas that we've covered during this thing. I've got many more pins that could be put in here. But what we do is every time we find an artifact, we pin it. And then we start to look, we find the patterns of everything. And then we match it up with all of the research that we do. And usually we will figure it out by using all of these techniques together in a focused research project here. So this is the entire thing. We've just finished the last trip out there, and we will probably do a couple more this year. And that is the story of Camp Meyers Spring. The last thing I'll tell you is that everything that we do is available. We don't charge anything for any of our work or reports. And the last one to go up is on the website here. You get the website, West Texas Archeological Society .website. And here is the report that just went up here for 2025. And you can see we've done a lot of other reports. We do the Butterfield Trail, Comanche Trails, a lot of stagecoaching, a lot of military camps. We're now, I was telling Wendy, we're starting to work an Apache hideout camp right now. And in fact, we're going Friday to go out to that site. So we're very busy, and we enjoy doing it, and we enjoy letting everybody know what we do and how we do it. So I guess we'll take questions.
Yeah, Mr. Ashmore, I've got 2 questions. I'm just curious, at the time that, well, actually, I guess the time frame doesn't actually matter. How far do they have to travel up for a water source? Because that's a pretty dry area. I mean, I haven't spent time down there, but based on what I know, it's not like you have water fountains any place. So when you say the scouts were on water detail, I can't even imagine how far they had to travel.
Well, locally, what I didn't talk about in here is the cavalry they had 2 water camps that they put people down into that pretty much had to live down there, and the wagons would just go down day in and day out to they would bucket the water into these big barrels and stuff. So those were about a mile from the camp, and if you were to go away from this area here, the next water source is about 25 miles as the crow flies north to Independence Creek, or about 20 miles to the east to the Pecos River. But for the clean water, they wanted to get the clean water. It was fine for the animals, but you wanted spring water so you don't get sick. The next clean water was Independence Creek, about 25 miles.
And I'm just curious. Again, I haven't spent time down there, but when you say wild pigs, were those actually javelinas or what is now plaguing a good part of the country? We actually have another cousin that sometimes hunts wild boar, so that got my attention. I'm curious.
I think, well, they were javelinas for sure down in that area, but I'm not sure. I don't know when the wild hogs came into the area, if it was later or not. But javelina were there is natural from that area. The other thing that I didn't talk about in here was mountain lions. I'm pretty sure even today, the owner has captured and killed 10 mountain lions in the last 5 years, I think it is. So there were mountain lions all over the place there at that time. And in one case,
I didn't mean to cut you off. I would also think, from what I know about the history of the area going back then, you may have had some jaguars every now and then, because
yeah,
they were known to travel that far north.
yeah, the jaguars were down in Mexico. I think it was mostly mountain lions. Yeah, and bobcats and that kind of thing. So, yeah, but they were prolific hunters, that's for sure.
Did they have guards
Any
on the
other
horses at
questions?
night? Since they probably had even a bigger problem with the Panthers back then. I'm just curious. Would you know,
Oh no, what
based
was
on what
that?
your research has come up with? I'm just curious if they would have to put guards on the horses at night.
Well, definitely the cavalry were putting guards out all the time, 24 hours a day. The I have never found a guard post for the scouts. It may be that they were putting out guards, but they weren't doing it in the same way. They didn't have a post or a place to sit or something like that. They might have put a guy on a horse and just kind of travel around and check the area. They were so good at finding any kind of sign of some Indians at all that they were pretty aware of anything that was going on in their area.
I was just thinking in terms of Panthers probably coming down and try to, predate on the horses.
No, I don't know if yeah, I don't know. That one I can't answer, but
Okay,
they probably
excuse me,
did
I get
have a
geeky
night.
like that.
It would probably have a night guard for the horses no matter what.
Yeah.
It's just that we never found any particular spot that they were uh, putting themselves in compared to the regular military.
Thanks.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Hey, Tom. Excuse me. I think my question has to do with what your process is. Seems like you start in the sky with the drone, right? And then just get more and more specific.
Okay, I'm not picking up. What say again?
Oh, I was asking about your process. Do you
Okay.
first start with like the biggest picture sort of up in the sky with the drone and then just get more
Yeah.
and more specific?
Well, I always start with the satellite imagery.
Mhm.
And then when we get down there, if we need to look at something closer in, for example, the assembly area is a good example of the scout camp. We didn't realize the assembly area is set up in a triangle, which is unusual too. and we didn't see that until we saw it with the drone. And it's set up perfectly to fit about 39 people by measurement, so you can see things with the drone that you can't see with satellite and vice versa.
Okay.
You just have to figure out which one is best for what you're looking for. And that's just regular EO, electro-optical type of stuff. We don't use LiDAR or anything like that.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
All right. I'll turn it back over to you, I guess.
Okay. Dr. Crawford, did you have a question?
No, I'm just I'm listening. Thank you
Okay. Well, good to see your face.
as well.
Does anyone else have any a question or questions?
All right. Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I hope
you.
I'll see you
Oh,
again in
looks like we have
Seminole
contact,
days, I
please.
guess.
No, someone's, I don't know what that means. Are you clapping?
Clapping.
It's just clapping, just celebrating. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, I need to learn what the emojis mean.
Yes, that was a clap
Okay,
for
cool.
him. Okay.
Yeah, I'll be back down for Seminole days, and I'll see you
Yeah, so
then, I
maybe
guess.
Friday. Yeah.
Yeah, for Friday. Okay.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks for
Thank you,
having me.
everybody. And we'll look forward to seeing everybody next month for our next presentation. Again, thank you everybody for getting on tonight. Y'all have a great evening.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, near need, Pete.